Tov Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun Zayin. We are up to the Seder in the Avodah where the Kohen Gadol is going to be sprinkling from the bloods of the bull and of the goat, not when they are mixed together, prior to mixing them together. Towards the paroiches or on the paroiches, the first thing that we will have to deal with is that by kachim we have unique laws. One of them we just learned a few times, and that is dafka by kachim. That only if shana baha kasuv, then it's la'akev. That when God writes to do a certain step, if it's not repeated, it only means it's a mitzvah, ideal, or a lechatchila. But when do we know that this step is essential? Meaning if you skip it, even after the fact, you got to do over. That's only if God repeated it twice. There has to be a greater elaboration by kachim versus the other mitzvahs in the Torah. There's another unique din and kachim which have the same underlying rationale, and that is that we don't allow to make a double hekesh. If you remember, we learned that in Zvachim. There's no double hekesh. In other areas of Torah, if God reveals something in halacha A, and then I make a comparison B to A, so now I know it by B. At some point, I can compare C to B. C to B, B to A. Hekesh, hekesh. Choyze vehekesh. By kachim, we don't make a double hekesh. And just to speak out now in the intro, perhaps Al Pi Chasidus, is that Torah is the Torah from all the worlds. It's the same Torah, but it's learned in every oilam different. And we learned a while back a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe that what is the Torah that's learned in Atzilus? Chumash. Even though sometimes we read that Chumash comes all the way down to Asiyah, but let's go with that model. So what Torah do you think is the most important Torah that they live in Atzilus? Not damages, not Nezikin. The Iker Torah of Atzilus is Kachim and Taras, which is why in the Torah Kachim and Taras is more elaborate than all the other dinim. So the Alter Rebbe explains, the Mishnah Chagiga, that there are dinim that are called Gufi halachas, then you have halachas that are mountains hanging on a hair, then you have Oisius Parchas Ba'avir. Why are certain Oisius Parchas Ba'avir? Because in that world, this Torah is the least relevant for that world. Be mekatzer. So since Kachim is the Iker Torah of Atzilus, Kachim have to be spoken out with greater detail. So if God wants to tell you something is essential, God will write it twice. And you don't make a double hekesh. It has to be spelled out clearer. And we're going to begin today's daf by asking, from where we just learned that even the hazois lefnai v'lefnim were not that clear. How do you know that there has to be by the par achas lamayla? It only says achas lamayla by the soid. How do you know by the soid you have to have sheva lamata? It doesn't say sheva lamata by the soid. So we made a hekesh between the par and the soid in the Holy of Holies. And we finished last daf by saying, how do you know all the steps of the hazois on the paroiches? You're makish, the oil moyed to the kodesh kachim. That's a classic double hekesh. You can't make a double hekesh. Wow. So we're going to have to resolve that. And then for the rest of the daf, well, we're going to have the machloikas, the big machloikas, whether they needed to sprinkle it on the curtain or in opposite the curtain. Which will, by the way, also, that's important because by the Holy of Holies, we have made it clear, no one says it has to be on the ark cover. No one says that. Al is like lifnei. So is it opposite or is it al? We'll have a few stories in the Gemara. We're going to go back to the story that we had in Me'ilah we just quoted. And then for the rest of the daf, as far as we can get, yes, at a certain point, the bloods needed to be mixed. Question we're going to deal with today, what happens if they get mixed by mistake when they should not have gotten mixed? Let's say the Kohen Gadol now is in the Kodesh, he didn't sprinkle any of the pot and the soid towards the paroiches, and these bloods got mixed. What do you do now? Do you have to go back to the beginning? Or can you somehow use these mixed damim? And how would you do that? That will be a machloikas Rav and Abi Yirmiyah and a lot more. So let's start, Chevra, 4 lines from the top of the Amit. Like we just mentioned, that how do you know all the details of the hazois on the paroiches? Because it says in Achrei Mois that v'chein yaseh l'oyel moyed. So however you do it, lifnai v'lifnim, we make a hekish to lifnim. So it says, the Gemara asks the Gemara, it doesn't make sense. V'chidavar halamed behekish, choyzer umalamed behekish. Even the steps lifnai v'lifnim, the achas l'mayla v'shev l'mato, the achas l'mayla v'shev l'mato, is learned. There was already hekesh, now not hekesh for everything, but hekesh for parts. Achas l'mayla is written by the soid only. Sheva l'mata is only written by the par. So you already made a hekesh in the Holy of Holies. Now you're making a double hekesh? Oh, so now we're going to chazer what we learned in Zvachim. Now, first of all, it's not a full double hekesh. Because like we mentioned, the Shevel Amata is written by the Par explicitly. The Achas Lamaita Vehiza Oisoi is written by the Sword explicitly. So this is called Hay Heimenu Vidavar Acharu. Some parts is only a single hekesh. Some parts. Other parts are a double hekesh. So we had the machloikis and zvachim, whether that's called a double hekesh or not. So first of all, if you're going to follow those who hold that since some of the dinim don't need a double hekesh, so you can learn all of the dinim, that's called that hay heimenu vidavar acher, and therefore it's not called a hekesh, means it's not called a double hekesh, is good. So hanich lamanda amar lo have a hekesh, el lamanda amar, no. That's at the end of the day, some pratim, right? How do you know that the part has to be achas lamayla, lifnai v'lifnim, from a hekesh? So how would you know that it has to be by the paroiches, by the para achas lamayla? That's called a double hekesh. To have a hekesh, Michael Meimer, so the Gemara gives two answers. Answer number one is when the hekesh is not focusing on the same thing. A double hekesh would mean that if there's a specific din by A, and then you make a hekesh to be for that din. By kachim, you can't now teach C for that din. That's not the case over here. The only hekesh for outside is focusing on the location. I'm sorry, the lefnai v'lefnim is focusing, the first one is about the numbers, right? The numbers of the hazois, which is not fully clear. The second one is focusing that you have to put it on the paroiches, as you did inside. One is about the makoim, one is about the numbers. You're not focusing on the same thing. So that's not a problem. And Ibo Yisema, chutz mipnim bechada zimna gamar, which means that even according to the shita that holds that heimen of a davar achet is considered a hekesh, here it's different. Why is it different? Like Rashi explains, the Torah wrote nothing of what you do bachutz. Nothing. What's if the Torah would have written that you have to sprinkle it bachutz with greater details, and all now you want to learn is how many numbers above and below, that would be a double hekesh. But since it's like Mekoimois plus, since you don't know anything from the outside, so you are beginning to compare it to that there's a pot and there's a soir and they're sprinkled separately. None of this is a double hekesh. And even in the details, some of the details are also written explicitly. Since all of the dinim from the outside are learned from the inside, even the one that holds that normally when there is heimen of a davar achet is considered a hekesh, not over here. Not over here. I'm reading inside the Rashi. Even if we're going to view that some details b'fnim even is learned with the hekesh, it's considered one direct limud. Because since nothing is written outside, so when there's one hekesh of a chen yasa la'oyel moyed, that for sure goes for the shevel amata by the par. Because the Torah wrote no details, like Rashi says, "Vehechi dami hekesh she'ein olamed min hekesh kegoin im loy hutzrach hechel lilmoid milafnai velafnim ella al mashalim behekesh." In other words, if we wouldn't have to make any comparison other than those details that were already learned behekesh, then you got yourself a double hekesh. And then, by the way, we would say shevel amata, yeah, but va'achas lamaylo no. But since God gave us no details about the hechel, and it's only v'chein yasa la'oyel moyed, so it's as if it's already lefnai v'lefnim. It's considered one limud. It's like we don't make exeda l'gezeda. Sometimes we say chad gezeda he. This type of hekesh can be made. Let's go weiter. Tana we learned in the Braisa kishumazem. Einamaza, that's one sheet. Einamaza ala paroiches. You don't sprinkle it actually on the paroiches. Elo keneged paroiches, opposite the paroiches. However, Amar Rabbi Lazar ben Rabbi Yosi, Anida Yesia beroimi. I saw the paroiches in Rome, and here Rashi goes into more pratim. We spoke it out in the Mishnah. That's Me'ilah, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. That the Romans, from the many times they made exeda regarding that we can't keep Shabbos, we can't do a bris milah, and we can't keep Taras HaMishpacha. So first we sent an undercover agent to go into the parliament, and he made gavaldic arguments. Do you want your enemy to be stronger or weaker? You want your enemy to be weaker? Let them make a bris. You want your enemy to be wealthier or poorer? Poorer, let them not work on Shabbos; they'll become poor. You want them to be numerous or less numerous? Less numerous, let them keep taras hamishpacha half of the month. They can't be together. But then they discovered that person that made those arguments over there in the parliament was a Yid. So they said that this gezerah can never be abolished. So now we needed a miracle. That was Kedai Rashbi, Lismai Chalov. That Rashbi wanted to travel with someone. So he chose Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi with some details about that. And ultimately, like Rashi reminds us, that before they entered Rome, came a demon by the name of Ben Talmayoin. And first Rashbi was so disappointed, and he says that, Oy Gewalt, that I'm only going to get the salvation through a shade. The earlier generations would have had God Almighty or a Malach. But he made use of what he had, and he put this demon into the daughter of the Caesar. And then he came to heal her. And then the Caesar, as a reward, told him, go into my treasury and take anything you want. So he went in there and he took out this gezerah. But once they were in the treasury of Rome, and since he traveled with Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi, so he says, Anida Yisi, I saw the curtain, and I saw various drops of blood, both from the pot and the soil of Yom Kippurim. Now, if the dam was not meant to touch the paroiches, if it was only meant to go opposite the paroiches, Kayhanim's reason, you wouldn't have had the dam on the paroiches. And especially if he stood relatively far away from it. You have to know where he stood. Which means that to hit the paroiches, you have to make an extra effort. So even if there's chulsha the kohen gadol, some details, no, it's hard to make it further. Is that ayah that you have to put it on the paroiches? Says the Gemara, what proof is that? This is not the only avodas damim that was opposite the paroiches, or on the paroiches. All of the chatois, hanaasois befnim, like the par helam davar, like the soir of avodah zarah. Again, that if you have the Sanhedrin erroneously ruling regarding a detail of a lav sheyesh boikaris, or God forbid even on avodah zarah, and roiv hatzibur, whether it is the majority of the Jews or only a majority of a shevet, not including the Kohanim, they're not called kol, that if they sin, then the community has to bring a chatos, but the blood is sprinkled inside, maybe that dam is on the paroiches. How do you know that this was from the avodah of Yom Kippur? The dilma da parelam davar shel tzibur, or of the seiri avodah zarah hava. And by the way, you can even say further that he saw both types of bloods. We just learned in last daf that they have different colors. So maybe they're from different, once there was a par elam davar, there was another soid avodah zarah. By the soid avodah zarah, there's also a par, if I'm not mistaken. So you had both. Answers the Gemara, no, that the chazi davidi kisidron, the whole din, like we explained Rashi, that the kematzleif, that they cannot be one on top of the other, that they were organized, one was farther and one was closer, one was higher, one was lower in a seder. That was not done when you sprinkled the pat helam davar, and when you sprinkled the soir of avodah zarah. That's only done on Yom Kippur. You know how much kavanah you have to the blood organized in that way? It was only there if he was mechaven to do that. So that's a raya that this taka it needed to be not opposite the paroiches, but on the paroiches. Now I want to make a correction. When we learned Me'ilah, I'm almost certain that I mentioned, remember guys, that we learned in Gittin Dafnun Vavamid Beis, that when Titus the Rasha, when he went into the Holy of Holies and he did terrible things in there and he desecrated the area, he also on the way out, he took his sword and he stabbed the paroiches and it bled. So I think we mentioned when we learned avodah zarah that the other chachamim could argue the blood was from that. No, it was not kesidron. That blood wasn't kesidron. And I'll go another detail. To have two colors dam of the pot and the soir, that lochayra would not come out of the paroiches. So his raya is taka raya. Let's go weiter. And v'tanan, now by the way, this is a braisa. V'tanan nami gaba para helam davar shel tzibur ke hay gavno. And by the way, just to make it clear that regarding the par helam davar, including the soir of avodah zarah, we have the same achlekas tanoim. Even though the Torah there writes clearly it has to be sprinkled towards the ala paroiches, does al mean on or opposite? Kshumaze lo yoyin ba paroiches. Elamavim nagu nagu. But Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi aniri yisiya bereimi v'hoy oleh kama tipi damam shel par helam davar v'shel tzibur, right? Shel tzibur, and they were one on top of the other, as we'll see in a moment. And if you're going to tell me now, don't forget here the Chachamim said v'im nagu nagu. So here you cannot. Here it's easier to argue. Listen, you don't have to do it. It happened to touch. And here Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi will hold again Kahanim Zerizim. If you don't have to do it, it would not touch. Maybe v'dilma par v'soyer shlema kippurim ninu. Maybe the blood that he saw, maybe par helam tzibur shel par helam davar shel tzibur, maybe siri avaris kichavim doesn't have to touch. Maybe the dam that he saw on the pareiches was from Yom Kippur. So here again, the chazinu davidi shaloi kesidron. He saw on the curtain both types of bloods. In some places, he saw the blood organized, one lower than the other. He also saw on the pareiches bloods, one on top of the other. So he says, I saw that it hit the pareiches. End of story. And now we're going to start if all of these phenomenal scenarios of if the bloods got mixed up together when it should not have gotten mixed up together. Now the reason why it got mixed up together is because there is a moment during the avodah that you have to mix the damapar and the damasoir. And we learned in the Mishnah, our Tana said, and that is after you finish doing all of the hazois on the paroiches, prior to doing any of the sprinklings on the Mizbeach Hazav, you needed to mix them together. And let's go weiter. There's a whole shada kohen gadol. And you have this pressure, which shouldn't congeal. So what were to happen if b'shoigeg it got mixed up together? So let's start case number one. Now when exactly did it get mixed up over here? So Rashi writes it got mixed up before any step. That's what's mashma from Rashi, and that's very problematic. Why is that very problematic? Because if you remember, the shchita of the soir only happened after you sprinkled the par. And we also learned, Silent Rab Yehuda, Silent Rab Nechemia, that all of the steps of the avodah that was done with the big day love and lefnai v'lefnim, the sequence is ma'akev. That's a problem. So other Rishonim, and maybe that's even Pshat Nashi, say that this is that you did the avodah b'fnim, lefnai v'lefnim, because that's why you have the dam of the soir. But before you sprinkled anything on the paroichesin, what happens if the bloods get sprinkled together? So we have two approaches. Amar Rava, I'll tell you what. Noisan achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata. Only do the avodah once, and and you can fulfill both obligations, gavaldik, with a single act of sprinkling. In other words, first of all, the damim they don't lose their identity. Each one retains its identity, and that's lakula alma. So oy bazoy, you have both the pot and the soid. So do one act of sprinkling and have in mind for both. So holds it over. So amrua kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah. They said, that what Rabbi held, and Rabbi Yirmiyah said his sharp words, which we find elsewhere as well, plenty of places. Amar, Bavloi Tipshoi, these foolish Babylonians, Mishum the Daida Ba'ara de Chashech, it's not their fault, it's because of the environment. They live in a dark environment. Begashmias, for short, means Beruchnias. Therefore, sometimes, Nishklor, the Amri Shmaitze the Machashchan, they say dark. They say dark statements. And why is it dark? Why did he completely reject it? Because if you're doing it all together, so the achas lamaila is also from the soir, then you're doing the lamata. You went out of sequence. And v'hatleira amra specifically, Tez Zayin Pasuk Chaf, look inside the Chumash. It says, V'chila mechaper es HaKodesh, and he shall complete the atonement. Shkoyach, of course he'll complete. No, that's not an extra verse. God is saying complete step number one before you do step number two. That Kale Dam Hapar, first complete the Dam Hapar. Completely, and only then, V'chakach Kale Dam HaSoir. Beautiful. So what should you do according to Rabbi Yirmiyah? Ella Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Noisan Achas Lamayla V'Sheva Lamata L'Shem Par. And again with the mixed bloods, V'Choyze V'Noisan Achas Lamayla V'Sheva Lamata L'Shem HaSoir. And the Tosfos Yeshanim, but it didn't fit here, it's only on that Chesam Beis, says like this. There's a machlokes throughout whether mitzvah is tzrichas kavana or not. So if mitzvah is tzrichas kavana, then it works. Because if you only have kavana for the par, then it's not going to be the soir. Don't forget, guys, the damims don't lose their identity. The big question of Rabbi Yirmiyah is how did he answer the question? When you throw the achas lamayla, don't you have the dam hasoir in it? So what if you did not intend? So if mitzvah strichas kavana, then it works, because since you were not machavan for the soir, it's only for the dam hapar. And Tosfos writes, even if you're going to subscribe to those who say that mitzvahs don't need intent, so Tosfos has a gewaldike yisoid. When do we say that? Only when you're doing the mitzvah bizmana. But if you are doing a mitzvah shaloi bizmana, l'kula alma mitzvah strichas kavana. And since you were not mechavan to the soir, you were only mechavan to the par, then it only works for the par. Achas l'mayla v'shevel l'mata to the par. V'chila mechaper. Now you do it again, la kodesh. Now continues the Gemara.
If you could say, Rabbi,
yes,
that even if you say it doesn't need kavana, but if you dafka have kavana that it's not the sar, I'm only being mechavan that it's the par. Right? So
I like what Danny is saying. Okay, so Danny is saying, and we have such a thing. By the way, it's good to know that there are times that even if mitzvahs don't need kavana, but a negative kavana undoes it. Tosfos doesn't write that. Tosfos writes this word, which is another chiddush. What you're saying can be worded as a question. What's his raya? Maybe he has a kavana not for the soil. And that's shitas Tosfos Yishonim, that mitzvahs tzrichas, even if you say mitzvahs lav tzrichas kavana shaloi bizmanon and needs kavana. Then the Tosfos speaks about Bal Tosef. We don't have time. This is a great topic. Okay, now let's go to the next step. And here Rabbi Yirmiyah will get tripped up. What's the next step? What happens if nisarvu loidamim b'damim b'matanis u'achroinois? Let me say what that means. The Kohen Gadol sprinkled achas l'mayla of the pod. For whatever reason, now he mixed the bloods together. Now think about it. What is he going to do now? He's going to do sheva l'mata. We got a problem here. What's the problem? Because in it you have the so'ir, right? Then you're going to do the sheva l'mata of the so'ir before you do the achas l'mayla. Guys, we're going to go back to Rava. We already said Rabbi Yirmiyah. You're thinking about Rabbi Yirmiyah, you don't see the problem. What did Rava say? Rava said before, you can do a one sprinkling for everything. So if it happened afterwards, now Rav Papa doesn't know Shitas Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rav Papa wanted to be mamshech, he wanted to extend Rava's opinion. So Rav Papa, and he said it in front of Rava. Lemeimara, you'll tell me the same thing. Noisen sheva l'mata. Keep on going. Rava minimized the steps. Rava included everything together. You sprinkled one of the damapar, sprinkle 7 times lamata, and that will be l'shem apar and l'shem asoir. What are you missing? The achas lamayla of the soir. The chayzev v'nois and achas lamayla l'shem asoir. Would you say that? So Rava got upset. Rava said, they called me foolish for what I said before. Oy gewalt. Now they're going to call me the fool of the fools. They called us tipshoim, not naranim, fools. V'hashta tipshoi dit tipshoim. Which is, what are they going to say? They're going to get upset. They're going to say, that we in Eretz Yisrael were teaching those Babylonians and that they don't chop, they don't learn. What will be the problem? Because even Rava would not agree to that. That's even worse. And that's for sure not the correct procedure. Daf nun zayin amid beis. So here, even Rava, Ela Amar Rava, now he will hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Here he'll hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah. You don't have an option over here. Noisen shevel amato, and you have in mind only l'shem par, and therefore it doesn't work for the soid. And now the chayzer v'noisen achas lamayla v'shevel amato l'shem soir. Like this, you follow the correct sequence. Another beautiful case of mixtures. What happens, says the Gemara, if nesar v'loy koisos b'koisos.
Why can't he just, according to Rava, just do one more above and then 7 below?
Because, why? Let's speak it out. So then he's asking, why didn't you do one more above? Because you have to finish the dam hapar. See, before he did it all babasachas. Before he did it babasachas. Here, if he's going to do one above, then he did one stand-alone step of the so'ir before he did the sheva lamata by the pod. That's also out of sequence. Even according to Rava, that's out of sequence. Rava only, there's one after the other, and then there's one together with the other. Like, how do you view basachas? Right? Gita v'yoda boin kiyachas. Gita v'yoda boin kiyachas means that Rava Mistamas describes that even though it happened together, you can view it as basachas. I have to get the right oasis. It works. No, it's in the first case, you don't say that the soid was before the sheva lamata of the pod. Because since the soid was with the pod, we can view it as with the pod. It was with the pod. But if you're going to do a standalone soid, that got in the way between the achas lamayla v'shalmat of the pod. Okay, next. Now you're going to have the cups got mixed together. Let's go back to the whole fear of Rabbi Yehuda. The cups got mixed together. Now the bloods are not mixed up together, but we don't know which one is which. Now again, one is pale and one is not. You know what? The Kohen Gadol is ashtikal colorblind, and the damim got spilled out, and the cups, everything looks the same to him. Now that we learned the importance of never going out of sequence, so you have to make 3 applications. Why do you make 3 applications? A, B, C. Cup A, cup B. You go A, B, A. Abba, why are you doing? You're doing it like this. Noisin, the chayzev and noisin, the chayzev and noisin, shloisha pamim, and you covered all your bases. It's if the first cup that you took was takadam apar, which means cup base is damasoir. So when you did base, you're good. Aleph was, again, just to make sure for the other possibility. What was the other possibility? That Aleph is damasoir. So if you did soid before par, it's completely invalidated. It's garnished. So now you do base is the par, but you have to do the soid after the par. So if you apply it 3 times separately, then for sure, whichever one is which, you covered your bases. Now we have another mixture. Now this is really a very unusual case. And that is, cup A is the dam hapar. Cup base is the dam hasoir. And they never got mixed up together. For some reason, there was a cup gimel. And some of the blood of Aleph and some of the blood of Beis went into Cup Gimel. And in Cup Gimel, they're mixed together. Now, let's just clarify the question. No one is even thinking about whether you should use Kois Gimel. Of course not. You have Aleph and Beis separated. The question will only be, how do we classify Kois Gimel? How do we classify Kois Gimel? Guys, what do we do with the remnant of the blood? There's something called Shirayim. And all of the karbanis that are brought inside, the remaining blood is poured al yisoid mizbach ha'olah. But if there are damim that are not called shirayim, but they are called dechuyin, rejected bloods, or they are pulled straight in the canal. So what we want to know right now is if such a thing were to happen, how do we classify the blood in Kois Gimel? Let's read it inside. Mixas damim nis'ar v'loi, in a 3rd cup. In Kois Gimel, what we'll call mixas damim loinis arvoloi, but the pot is in Kois Aleph and the soid is in Kois Beis. So pshita, one thing is clear that Kiko Yoev, when you continue the avoid of placing the damim, of course mivadoin Yoev, you apply it from the Aleph and Beis that are separated. The question is miu hanoch, the mixed bloods in the third utensil. Do we say shirayim habu? We classify it as shirayim, and therefore, at the end of all of these steps, uli yisoid asli, you pour it on top of the base of the outer altar, oy dilma, that you consider it dechuyim, rejected damim, and therefore va'aslu la'ama. Now let's link this bayah to the prior bayahs. What happens if you only have mixed bloods? So either Rava or Rabbi Yirmiyah, you can use it. It's not really rejected. But you know when they say you use it when you have nothing else other than the mixed bloods. Silent Rava, silent Rabbi Yirmiyah, if you have an option, because some of the bloods remain separated, don't use the mixed bloods. Even if you're going to do it like Rabbi Yirmiyah says. That's the beautiful question. So you can argue it's not called a choyin, because this blood itself could have been used. On the other hand, in our case, where you have still stand-alone, unseparated, unmixed up bloods, no one is going to use Kois Gimel. So de facto, it became rejected. If we classify it as rejected, then you cannot put it on the Amam. That is the Bayam. So Amar Rav Papa, like this, he links it to the following case. Guys, guys, think about it. What happens if you shecht an animal, like a chatas? That's where they have this discussion. And the kohen who's doing the Kabbalah, for whatever reason, didn't use one mizrak, he used 2 cups. Some of the dam in cup Aleph and some in cup Beis. And then when he applied the blood on the Mizbeach, there are a few cases. In this case, he only used Kois Aleph. It's very similar. How do you classify cup B? Is it Shirayim, Soid HaMizbeach, or is it the Chuyin? Let's read it. So Amar Rav Papa Filo Laman the Amar, in the case that we just described. Kois Echad Oise Chaveroi Shirayim. In the case of Chatos, that's the case that they speak about. It can be to other Korbanos as well. And Kab B is also poured Al Yisoid Mizbach Ha'olah. You know why? Hanamili. Because when you had the 2 cups, they were both equally good. None of them was better than the other. none of them were rejected on any level. Ibai Lamesa of Matziyov, right? The Ibai Lamesa of Matziyov. Aval Hai, but in our case, since in our case you have Kois Aleph, Par, Kois Beis Soid, Kois Gimel mixed. In this case, Bein L'Rava, Bein L'Rab Yirmiyah, don't use Kois Gimel, because you have the better option of Kois Aleph. So since now you rejected Kois Gimel, Aval Hai, the Ibai Lamesa, if you're going to ask a Shiloh to a Rav, which they ask, can I use Kois Gimel? Especially L'Rava, and just get over with it? Do achas lamayla v'shevel lamata for both? If God forbid that attitude, I'm saying he would have told him no. So now we should consider it and reject it. Now we're going to go to the opposite direction. So I go punk fakert. You're telling me it's the choyin. I'm going to tell you it's shirayim. And even that when you have kois echad ois echaveroi, dachoy, in the case of the chatois, you have two cups, you only use kois aleph. Even those who say kois base of the chatas is called the choyin and it's not poured al yisoid, it has to go into the amon. Hanamili there. Fakert, since you had two cups, this is gavaldik, and you could have chosen each one, and you chose cup aleph. Your choice rejected kois beis. Kois beis was just as good. That is rejection. Rejection means fakert, two things are equally good for you, and for whatever reason you chose aleph. That means you rejected the other. That's called you were the dachia biyadayim. But if the reason when you have Kois Aleph Beis Gimel, it wasn't that you chose Aleph and Beis. No, you were told for a technical reason, don't use Gimel. It wasn't you who rejected it. And we're not even saying that halacha rejects it because it has an intrinsic issue. It doesn't. Since it's mixed together, it's better to follow the sequence separated. That's not called dachui. I would argue it's still called shirayim. And that's the end of this. Notice now we have a machlokes. How do we view kois gimel? Machlokes amayroim. But now that we mentioned the case of achatos, now we're going to chazer the case of achatos, where you were makabel the dam in two cups. So the Tanya, again, the Tanya is regarding Kabbalah into using two cups. Now the beauty in Vayikra is that the Torah introducing the Karban Chatas doesn't give one case. Remember in the Chumash, again, this is the Torah of Atzilus. Everything is spoken out with detail. The most elaborate in the Torah is Kashrus, Mamish, which is connected to Taris, Tazriya Mitzoira, and Kachin. Because that's the Iker Torah of Atzilus. The first dinim that the Torah was speaking about was the Chatas of the Nasi. I mean, there are many. There was the Kohen of Moshuach. Then you have Asher Yasi Nechta Ayechata, and there the Torah says Ve'ez Doma Yishboich. But then when the Torah at the end speaks about the ordinary chatas, the Torah says Ve'ez Kol Doma Yishboich. Now we got a problem here because the word Kol, all, is a inclusionary word. All of the dam, even that which you might have thought not, everything should be poured on the Yesoid. And Faket, when the Torah says by the parsha of Nasi that brings a chatas, the fact that it does not say Kol, it says as Domai, its blood is a exclusionary expression. So now we have to figure out when do we include and when do we exclude. So says the Tana Minayin Chatas Shekibel Dam Arba Koises. Look at this case. Not 2 cups. You were makabel in 4 cups. The nosan mizeh achas u'mizeh achas that you gave from each cup, you applied it on one of the koronos. Chatas is unique because you don't shtayim sheim arba it. Every corner, every horn gets its own blood application. This kohen used every cup for a different horn. So mamash, every cup has that which was put and that which remained. So how do you know that they are all poured on the yisoid? They are all kol shenayim. Oh, that is from the Eskol Dama Yishbech. That includes that case. Now, what happens if you applied the 4 corners only from 1 cup? The other cups were Bechlal not used. That you might have thought that it's still called Shirayim. No, Talmud Leimer, the Esdama, its blood, right? It's exclusionary. Hunishbach liyasoid. The cup from which you took the dam is going on the Yesoid. That's called Shirayim. Vehem nishbach la'ama. The chuyin, 1 Tana. However, Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Shimon Oimer, no. That minayin lachato shekibul lema arba koises v'nosan arba matonis me'echad mehem. That even in this case, all of them go on the Yesoid. everything is called Shenayim. Talmud Leimer ves kol dama yishpaich. Kol again is this inclusionary, even in this case. It says ves dama yishpaich. It's is a exclusionary expression. So Amar Avashi, there's one scenario that even he will say it's not called Shenayim, and that is Lema'ute Shenayim shebetzaver behema. That which remained on the neck of the animal, that's not called Shenayim. Right? That's not called Shenayim. That's already going to be called the Choyin. But everything else, even if it's not being used in a avoida, even if it's in another cup, he holds that we are all considered Shenayim. And that Al-Pi Chasidus, how beautiful is that? Right? We are called the She'edis HaPleita. That a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, even if he's in a separate cup. It's not called the Chayid, is not Dachui. Gewaldig. God willing to be continued. What we're going to continue tomorrow is now when we're going to make the proper mixing, and we're going to learn when we made the proper mixing to continue the avodah of Yom Kippur by the Kohen Gadol.